So waterfall photography is a genre of landscape photography all by itself. It truly is unique photography. And I think if you want to understand how to shoot waterfalls, there's a lot of things you got to know, but the exposure triangle is first and foremost. You really have to understand the exposure triangle. But there's many elements that go into shooting a waterfall. For example, there's the waterfall itself, the composition being the most important element of it, is framing up the image. And when you're at a scene like this, I mean, there are dozens of different compositions. Truly, there's endless a number of compositions you can compose. But my point is, there's a variety of different compositions that you can compose. And finding one and sticking with it, or maybe two, or maybe several if that's your thing. But I find that more often than not, it's better to focus on trying to find one composition and then working all the other elements. But the composition is the most important. In addition to composition, you've got to worry about light. Where are you shooting? Are you shooting into the light, away from the light? Is the light going to fall on your subject? It's just some things to think about. Are you going to have reflections, glare in your image that you might need a circular polarizer for? Are you shooting midday? I talked about midday, I think last week's video. I'll post a link to that at the end of this video. But midday sun is harsh. But if you're going to do that, you might need maybe a 10-stop neutral density filter to slow the motion of the water down. And that's another thing. How much motion do you want to show in the water? So, or do you want to show motion at all? I think landscape photography is a challenge, but waterfall photography can really be a big challenge. And then on top of all this, it's even getting to the location that can be challenging. I mean, some of these waterfalls I've shot in the past I'm hiking a couple miles in to capture these images. In fact, I've got a trip planned coming up here soon in which I'm heading back to the Ozark. And what am I doing? Shooting waterfalls. I do love waterfalls. They are interesting. But there's a number of things that you have to think about when you're shooting them. I mean, sometimes you're in close and you've got overspray kind of coming back on your lens, and before you know it, if you're not paying attention, you've got a blurred out image from the water droplets. You might need a microfiber cloth to wipe off your lens. I mean, there's just so much that goes into this, and I think that's what makes it so fun and exciting. But landscape photography wouldn't be landscape photography without waterfalls. I think one of the things you just absolutely can't skimp on is a good tripod. And I know I've talked about tripods in the past. In fact, I'll put a link to that in the end in the video description. But a good solid tripod is essential. Even the feet on the tripod, the choice of your foot, whether that's spikes, pads, claws, whatever you're using on your tripod is important, and it needs to match the terrain that you're shooting the waterfall in. Is it soft ground? Are you in the water? Maybe you're on a rocky bank. All these things are factors to getting a good image, because without a solid tripod, a 2.5, even a 1 second exposure, I mean, it's impossible to get a sharp image. You'll get motion blur in the water, but you won't get a sharp image. It's just impossible to do that without a good tripod. Another thing to consider is the lens that you're going to use. And this is why I'm a big advocate of scoping out the areas ahead of time and kind of having an idea of how far away from the waterfall you're going to be and what compositional elements you want to include in it. For example, do you want a foreground? Are you going to have overhanging branches? Are those going to be in focus? Are you going to have to focus stack? All good things to think about when you're out here shooting waterfalls. So deciding on a lens, you really need to have an idea of what you're going to shoot, where you're going to be at, how close do you want the waterfall and maybe compositional elements in the background to be compressed. You might need a longer lens. Maybe you're going to get in close to the base of the waterfall and really accentuate the waterfall. A wide angle lens might be the way to go. So lens choice is just something to think about. And maybe you're not really sure and you haven't been to the location before and you're hiking out there. You might want to carry a couple of lenses, but just something to think about with waterfall photography. In addition to a good tripod, I also prefer a gear head as opposed to a ball head. Now, there's nothing wrong with a ball head, but I found that when I personally am shooting waterfalls, I really like to kind of tweak the composition and get my frame set. And I find that a gear head allows me to make those minor adjustments without kind of the lens dropping. And I know if you use a good ball head that you're not going to get a lot of drop with that, but still, nothing beats a gear head for waterfall photography. I think making precise adjustments on that gear head, yeah, really nice. A few other things that are kind of less thought of is, so we talked about being in the water when you're shooting, and that might be the case, that you might have to be in the water. And so maybe adding some weight to your tripod might be important, but also just being in the water can be uncomfortable, certainly depending on the time of year. And you know, it's not just wearing a warm coat or gloves, but keeping your feet warm too. And so you might want to consider some insulated socks or some type of waterproof boot when you're out. Maybe you're even going to cross a stream, so that's just something to think about. It's actually getting to the location and being comfortable while you're shooting at the location, I think, is super important. You know, talking about the exposure triangle, one thing to think about is your depth of field. What do you want in focus? And is the foreground going to be in focus? Is it going to fall off from soft focus to focus? Is the background going to be out of focus? Those are all decisions that you have to make. And I find that, you know, having a good app like a depth of field calculator really helps to, it certainly helps me, and I like to shoot to the hyperfocal distance, or at least know, or reasonably be sure what's going to be in focus. And I think these calculators really do a good job of helping you do that. You used to be able to look at the lens and on the older lenses and get an idea of what was going to be in focus. So it's not really cheating, it's just using technology today, and our phones are always with us and super handy. You know, there's so many things that you could talk about for waterfall photography, but I would say I don't want to leave out this, and it's not often talked about, is a good headlamp for getting to your location. I'm a sunrise photographer. I like to get to my scene well in advance, certainly if I haven't been there before and I have no idea what the composition is going to be, but I like to line up that composition. And so another thing that I'll use is a good wide beam light, and this really helps me get into the composition and identify what that's going to be. And the big wide beam really helps me do that. So I would say a good light is essential if you're going to be early and compose that image. Also, if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know I'm a knee pad fan. And I'll tell you what, especially if you're going to shoot a waterfall and you plan on getting down low, knee pads are absolutely essential. They'll save you a lot of pain. Well, these are just a few things that you can use to really get out there and start capturing some waterfalls. By no means is it all inclusive. There's a variety of tips and tricks out there and YouTube videos that you can watch, and I suggest doing that. Get yourself in a situation where you're ready to get out and capture some images. Truth is, what do you really need to get started with waterfall photography? A decent tripod, a decent little camera, and you're well on your way. You can even use an iPhone and set that up on a tripod, and you can start capturing great images. Remember, it's all about what you're going to do with your image, really, and that's how I determine the camera to use. So if you're going to print billboard size images, you know, maybe you might want to think about a little bit better camera. But you know, if you're going to pass them around on social media, a phone is as good a camera as any. But anyway, there's a lot of perks to different cameras, and I'll save that for another video. But anyway, I'm going to get out of here and end the video. But if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And if you do subscribe, hit that little bell icon so you're notified of any future videos that I post. And drop me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. And as always, if I don't see you down the road, maybe I'll see you on the trail.